It's 5 o'clock. Time to clock out. Although the workday has come to an end for the office warriors of Music City, a more dreaded part of their day is just beginning. The commute back home wouldn't be so bad if every worker in the city wasn't trying to get home at the same time. But within minutes, the satellite traffic data on Google Maps looks like this. Anything that moves over asphalt is affected for miles. What normally takes half an hour to go from downtown to suburbia is now estimated to take over 2. For commuters traveling east towards Lebanon, there are 2 options. One is by road, where Interstate 40 is flowing okay, but the surface roads are even more packed and slower. Alternatively, they can go by rail. Yes, it's back, and it's been back for 15 years.
What we're finding really, from an international perspective, but certainly it's true in Nashville, where maybe it used to be that people chase jobs, now the jobs chase people. And as Nashville's become a more attractive place for particularly young people, well-educated folks to relocate to, we're finding large corporations and folks in the tech sector kind of following in behind. So it's a unique city in terms of its musical history and its musical infrastructure and its tourist orientation. So that frankly what we're finding is people come to visit Nashville and then are rapidly deciding that they'd like to relocate here.
Going as far back as the mid-20th century, Nashville had always been an attractive city. With more people moving into the city and its outlying suburbs, demand for better transportation could especially be felt in the early 1990s. With help from the Tennessee Association of Railroad Passengers, a makeshift commuter rail service was established between Nashville and the suburb of Hermitage. For 3 months, passengers rode in vintage passenger cars from the Broadway dinner train excursion over the rails of the Nashville and Eastern Railroad, with the final result yielding the desire for proper commuter rail service. Plans were drawn up for setting up the service to Lebanon shortly thereafter, with construction of the Music City Star officially kicking off in November of 2004. The route was brought up to commuter rail specifications mandated by the Federal Railroad Administration. Upgrades included new crossing signals on all public roads, and complete right-of-way realignments along Briley Parkway and through the community of Martha. Rolling stock would also be acquired on the cheap, with former Amtrak F40PH diesels pulling bi-level gallery cars acquired from Metra in Chicago. All stations were built with simplistic designs, with the most elaborate ones saved for the route's terminus at Riverfront Park. Sitting at the corner of 1st and Broadway, the end of the line is just walking distance from the many skyscrapers of downtown. For all points beyond downtown, passengers change to shuttle buses running on loops within the city. They extend the Star's reach to Sobro, the Gulch, West End, Vanderbilt, and the State Office Complex. With all of the costs added up, the price tag for the startup came to $41 million. On average, it costs between $3 million and $25 million for 1 mile of track to be upgraded. Most commuter lines share their routes with freight-carrying railroads, which can set the bar high or low to accommodate the additional trackage and other overheads. The Star's route follows the Nashville and Eastern, a short line which hauls less freight per year than their Class 1 counterparts. Because of this, construction only amounted to $1.3 million per mile.
Nashville and Eastern Rail Authority is a public agency that whose board consists of a number of the mayors and other leadership from the cities and counties along the entire alignment of the Nashville and Eastern Rail. R.J. Corman bought that entity about 2 or 3 years ago. We've always had a historically good relationship with the private rail operator. And that all comes down to the people who actually run the railroad, the conductors, the engineers, the operations management, the dispatchers. And that really has continued unabated. A lot of the same personnel. They didn't do a wholesale change of personnel. They kept on the folks who had worked for the prior owner. I think what R.J. Corman's also brought to the table is a level of technical expertise on both the passenger and the freight side that's been very beneficial.
The upgrades were completed by late summer of 2006. and a grand opening ceremony was held at Riverfront on Friday, September 15th. On the following Monday, September 18th, the first run departed Lebanon at 5:40 a.m. with 2 carloads of passengers. While initial ridership was projected at 750 daily riders, it took some time for that number to become consistent. Critics have dismissed that length of time as insufficient for the route to endure. Some of the service's setbacks, however, can't be helped. The Star only covers one route through sparsely populated areas of Wilson County, while missing out on the flourishing suburbs like Murfreesboro and Franklin. Why the Star does not serve these towns can be summed up rather ironically: traffic. These routes are part of the expansive Class 1 system known as CSX, and the mostly single-track right-of-ways offer just barely enough room for long, heavy freight trains. Throwing passenger trains into the mix would create more capacity problems. If there's any hope of bringing service to these towns, the railroad would ask the city or the state to fund the millions of dollars for expanding capacity. On the other hand, giving Wilson County residents the ability to travel without the car could, and has, opened up possibilities for redefining urban growth. One of these game-changing feats is Hamilton Springs, the first ever transit-oriented community in the United States, in which the station is just walking distance from home. Besides ferrying workers, special charter trains run at sold-out capacity to events like Titans football games, Nashville fireworks shows, and the Wilson County Fair. During winter storms, it's not uncommon for most of the bus routes to be suspended because of dangerous driving conditions, while the Star soldiers on unimpeded. Ridership was at its strongest in 2018, with nearly 300,000 riders. With the increase in population, alongside its new status as the largest city in the state, Nashville also boasts one of the worst commutes in the country. Congestion doesn't just waste more time on the road, it's also a hotbed for carbon dioxide emissions hampering the air quality and increases the risk of accidents, which could amplify the traffic jams exponentially. Going by car also means paying for gas, parking, maintenance, and insurance, which can drastically change at any given time. In 2016, the Metro Transit Authority started promoting a plan on expanding public transportation over the next 3 decades, with new additions to the Star included. The most notable addition was the Northwest Corridor, which would have extended service to Clarksville. Plans called for upgrading the rails of the Nashville and Western Railroad to just south of Ashland City, and then rebuild the remaining distance on the roadbed of the abandoned Tennessee Central Railway. The extension was quoted at $100 million to restore service. Along with new equipment and more stations, this was the biggest chunk of funding for commuter rail in a transit referendum package worth $5.2 billion. All of this and more were put on the ballot for Metro Nashville residents on May 2nd, 2018. On that day, however, it was voted down.
Some of the overriding themes that I heard was just a general concern over the rate and pace of growth in Middle Tennessee and how we grow as a region in the Nashville core. Obviously, it was a very big financing package in terms of the sales tax increase as well as some of the other funding sources, and people have a natural disinclination to vote to increase their own taxes. The thing certainly I heard in conversations with hundreds of folks, including some very ardent opponents of the referendum, was doesn't mean that there isn't a need to rapidly and radically expand our transit options in Middle Tennessee, and generally a consensus that at some point in time in the not too distant future we'll try it again.
In the immediate aftermath, a revised transit plan allowed for slight upgrades to the track, complete overhaul of the locomotives, and the acquisition of slightly newer gallery cars to replace its worn-out fleet. These changes helped put the Star on a sturdier foundation, but they didn't change the fact that it was still an underutilized train that was missing out on the hottest markets. Before the referendum, other proposals included double-decker highways, automated buses, and a monorail down the median of Interstate 24. Many citizens have expressed their preference for completing the northern half of Interstate 840 to better bypass the city, which has also faced turmoil from landowner disputes. Each alternative had their advantages and downsides, but none of them have made it off the drawing board. Another transit referendum is scheduled for 2024, and there's no telling how far this plan will go. Whichever side the voters choose, traffic is not going away. Traffic doesn't go away from other cities across the country, where passenger service has run consistently since the dawn of railroading. For passengers in Boston, New York, Chicago, and San Francisco, life is a little hard to imagine without an extensive network of speedy, frequent trains. Other cities had given up on rail, but rediscovered the magic of train travel with their own commuter rail startups. Orlando, Minneapolis, Salt Lake City, and Seattle are just a handful of cities that introduced their own systems in the 21st century.
Clearly, as I tell folks in Nashville, Nashville's transit referendum passed. It just didn't pass in Nashville. It passed in Austin, Texas. So Austin is doing things very similar to what was contemplated in the Let's Move Nashville plan.
These systems, in cities big or small, were built for the traditional 9-to-5 weekday patterns in mind. In recent years, however, certain global events has had all of the systems rethink their approaches.
So obviously, we saw a radical drop in ridership during the heart of the pandemic, but in many sectors, our ridership has come back super strong. The places, frankly, where it's lagging is in that downtown office commuter. So what you would think of as the typical 9-to-5 downtown work trip. We've actually seen ridership return almost to pre-pandemic levels on weekends and some of our late night and early morning service on the bus side. We've still seen a radical decline in downtown office commuters, and that's going to be something that we take a hard look at. We've completely refocused our service approach, so we're essentially, for lack of a better word, indefinitely suspended a lot of our commuter-oriented services in favor of applying those hours toward our all-day, all-week network, to better serve those riders that are coming back. In Nashville, I can't speak to, either the largest markets or other cities. We may very well see a trend that's permanent, semi-permanent, where people who used to come into the office downtown 5 days a week are coming in 3 days a week, 2 days a week, 4 days a week. We aren't seeing any decline in the demand for downtown office space. Office construction in downtown Nashville is going full speed ahead. We've got a number of major employers who have announced significant commitments of downtown staffing even since the pandemic, including huge companies like Amazon, which is locating their operations center of excellence here in downtown Nashville, ultimately with about 5,000 employees. With Oracle, that we will be putting a major campus in the downtown core with about 8,500 employees. So from the Nashville perspective, even if office work goes to more of a hybrid approach, we certainly expect there'll be enough downtown office-oriented activity to warrant significant upgrades in our mass transit system. All that's added to continual radical growth in our service sector, our entertainment sector, our tourism sector, and in fact, downtown Nashville as a residential location. We've about tripled the number of downtown residents over the last 10 years.
Nashville now stands as the 24th largest city in the country, and with the suburbs factored in, is one of the fastest growing urban areas. For Nashville's public transit to be on par with its neighbors, it needs the support of its people, both public officials and private citizens. What's important to remember is that mass transit in other cities, even in places smaller than Nashville, such as Albuquerque or Minneapolis, got to where they are today because they had the support of their people. They've had obstacles to overcome, and naysayers who tried to hold them back, but this is one of the few battles that's worth fighting because it ultimately affects how the city will move into the future.
Well, I think one of the things that the Star has demonstrated in Nashville is if you can provide a reliable transit alternative to driving, people will absolutely use it. Post-pandemic, I think there was sort of this narrative out there that, maybe people will be reluctant to use public transportation again with all the folks that are riding the train. Certainly because of the downturn in downtown office workers, we've seen that on our commuter side. On the other hand, just this past 4th of July, we ran our special train service for downtown Nashville's fireworks celebration. Recently in August, we had the Big Machine Music City Grand Prix, the first IndyCar race being held in downtown Nashville. In both of those cases, we ran supplemental service to serve those events. We completely sold out the train for 4th of July and sold out about 2/3 of the train for the events. So when folks have a reason to use the service, they absolutely do, and they showed no trepidation about doing so. The Star historically has carried twice as many folks as our regional bus service in the Murfreesboro corridor, 4 times as many folks as in the Williamson County corridor, and probably 3 times as many folks in the Sumner County corridor. And that largely goes back to the fact that no matter what, that train runs on time. It's a reliable trip. It doesn't rely on the weather that can hold up traffic on I-40 or an accident that can hold up traffic on I-40. In a typical month, the Star operates between 98 and 99% on time. So we see that time and time again.